welcome to part 4 of the procedurally generated terrain tutorial series. In this part, we're going to look at creating rivers and smoothing and roughing up your terrain. So this is the same code that we had in the previous tutorial. And this is the last landscape I actually generated with it. Now, I just want to reiterate what I said at the end of the last tutorial, is that if you want to get a lot of mountains and some nice sort of terrain like this, it's best to actually build up a lot of very small mountains on top of each other, and the same goes for holes. So as you can see in my settings over here, I'm generating like 1,000 mountains for this one, but I've got very small changes in the height so that it keeps adding lots and lots on top of each other, which creates a bit of interest, because if you create really, really big mountains, you get really spiky, unnatural looking stuff going on. So just play around that and be very careful with how many you add and the size of them, because you could end up crashing Unity, or at least it takes a long time to process it. Right, so let's get on to the rivers. So open up our code that we had before. Let me just fit this into here. And just like we've created apply mountains and apply holes and apply Perl type functions, we're going to also add and apply rivers and some river code as well, which will also be recursive. In between hole and apply holes, let's add our apply river function. Now, it's going to look a little bit different to the other ones. What the apply river is going to do is to crawl around on the surface of the terrain. So it's going to pick a random location to start from. I don't know why I've got 2 semicolons there, don't need that. So it picks 2 random an X and a Y random location to start on the surface of the terrain. It then generates a random direction of which to go in the X and the Y axis. And then it starts off with this while statement, which is saying while the Y coordinates haven't reached the edges of the map, and while the X hasn't reached the edge of the map, and for some reason I've got this -2 in here, which might be left over from something. Let's just get rid of that. And we're going to then do a river crawler. Now, the river crawler is basically the hole function. It's very similar to the hole function, but it actually digs out a little bit more. And you can also control the dig depth of the river, how far you're digging down, and also the slope of the river bank. These values we will set with variables up the top as we have before. Okay, so it digs one hole, and then it comes back to this apply river, and it then moves to the next position. So it picks a random location which is next to it on the map, and then it loops around again and digs another hole in that position. And then it picks another random location next to it on the map and digs a hole there. And so you get this meandering sort of river thing going on. Now, the important thing here is if we have a look at how the Y and the X random values are being controlled, the X direction is picking a value between -1 and 1. Now, an important thing to remember with random.range is that it doesn't include, when you're working with integers, the last value here. So if I want this to go between -1 and 1 for the change in our X direction, then I need to put a 2 on the end. And that's why you can see these 2s all over the place instead of a 1. So the X direction is changing either this way or that way each time we move around on the map, or within a certain chance, which is this. So every 5 times out of 50, it's going to change its X direction. And then the same with the Y direction as well. If you don't have these chance lines here, it will change every time this loops around, and it will be quite erratic. You kind of want a river to go off in one X direction for a little bit and then change like that. Now, if you want it to be more stable and straighter, you could change this chance here. Like if you could put a 0 on the end of this 50, make it 500, then it would be like 5 out of 500 chances that it's going to change its X direction. Okay, so the x direction, as I said before, is going negative and positive x directions that it will change. The y is only going to change positively or not at all. That will keep your river moving across the terrain in the y direction. Otherwise, you could sort of create something that only stays in one corner and it'd be quite an uninteresting river. So if you actually want it to travel forward for a fair distance, you don't want to making negative y directions. Otherwise, it keeps looping back on itself. But by all means, put a -1 in there and you can see the effect for yourself. Okay, so this is just going to crawl around on the map until wherever you started your river from hits the edge of the map, at which point it will stop. Now, this whole thing is controlled by the number of rivers so that you can then create another river and another river. Right, so let's go and have a look at this river crawler function, which is up here. Now, if you have a look, it's very, very similar to the digging hole function, which is just below it. And you could almost use the digging hole function if you wanted to. This, though, has a few more recursive calls on it. So where the hole function only has 4 recursive calls, this one has more. So you're actually adding these two, I think, so that you're doing plus x, x plus 1, y plus 1, x minus 1, y plus 1 movement in that digging of the hole, which is missing from these holes here. It also allows you to have a different slope and depth for the river onto the hole. Okay, so I'm not going to explain this because I explained how the hole works, and this is exactly the same. Right, so then in order to control all of this, we go up to the top where I've got these settings for it. So our river settings, we have a number of rivers that we want. We have a dig depth that we're going to dig down the initial hole. And then we've also got a max depth. As the river digs down, as it's moving along, it's going to go to this max depth. So it actually sort of starts in one spot on the terrain. And as it meanders across the terrain, it actually digs down deeper at the same time. And then we have our slope, which is how steep the sides of the river are. Now, to run this, we have to go right down to the bottom and look in the start function where we've applied the purlin and the mountains and the holes. And I've got apply river now added into there that will run this code for us. So let's just go back into Unity after saving it. Now I've already run the river once here. So let me show you. If we turn off the mountains, put 0 mountains and 0 holes and just 1 river and generate that. Okay, you can see what's happened. If we come over here, that you've got this river that meanders through the terrain. And so it would have started here quite shallow, and as it went through, it went in this kind of a direction, and it dug down as it went. It's best seen actually on this flat purlin surface. So let's just generate another one. Okay, and now we get this sort of effect here. So if we add, say, let's say 5 rivers. In this case, remember they all start at a random location, so it's kind of luck where they're going to be on this surface. In this case, they've all sort of ended up down in this bottom corner. And created that sort of an effect. Now, if you want it to be deeper, okay, you can set the depth, the max depth, set it down quite low, and it will dig further down into it. So now you see some really quite severe looking terrain elements going on. And even just with those rivers and without the mountains or the hole settings, you get something that's quite interesting. So it's really up to the effect that you're after as to what you do. Now, this was a nice river here. It went all the way across, whereas a lot of the other ones we were generating before kind of just started and like here and went to the edge, which was quite unfortunate if you're after something interesting. So if you want to tweak that, If we go back into paint terrain, let me just show you where you can tweak that. If we go up to the rivers, where is it? Apply river. This CY value, which is starting randomly, if we set it to start right on the edge, like that, remember that it's moving in a positive direction or not at all across the map surface. This will actually force it to start from one side and go across as far as it kind of can until it possibly does hit the X sides of the map. Let's save that and have a look at the effect of it. Okay, so if I go back to train and I just change down to one river and generate. Okay, you can now see that it's cut right across. And as long as that X direction never hits the sides, it will always cut across. And there you can see that's a really nice effect actually. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do in this tutorial is I'm just going to show you how you can rough up the terrain and also smooth it. You can see that this is quite rough here, and you might want to smooth that down, or you might want to rough up this surface here as well. So let's just go back in the code and we'll add a real quick couple of functions that will do that for us. Just above the apply purlin function, I've added two more. The first one is to rough the terrain, and the second one is to smooth the terrain. What the rough terrain does is it loops around each vertex in the terrain and grabs it and lifts it up a random amount. So you can see it's grabbing the height data at that XY position and adding a random value between 0 and this variable called rough amount, which we'll add to the top of our code in a moment. So that's quite simple. It's just picking each vertex and just moving it just a tiny little bit upwards. And then we've got a smooth terrain function, which again loops around all of the vertices. Now it doesn't start at 0. This one starts at 0 and goes all the way to the edge of the map. This one starts at 1 and ends just one shy of the edge of the map. Because what you want to do is to grab the vertex itself, which is this one, and all of the vertexes that are the neighbors, which are all of these ones. Okay, so one in every single direction. So if you imagine you're looking at a Rubik's Cube and this is the middle vertex on the Rubik's Cube, and these are all the surrounding blocks that go all around it, which means there's 3 across the top, 2 on either side, and then 3 across the bottom of it. And so these are all the XY positions for those. And we add all of the height values together at those positions and then divide by the number of vertices, number of height values, which is 9. And that will provide an average height that's between all of those 9 vertices. And then we set that average height to that actual vertex. And what that does is it has a smoothing effect, that it averages each vertex out with all of its neighbors and just sort of gets rid of any sharp edges that are around. Now, you can run this a number of times depending on how smooth you want it to be. So the more times you run this, the smoother the surface will get. The same with this. If you ran rough terrain a number of times, it would also create a lot more roughness in the surface. Now, to run these two functions, we do that down here in the start function, just before we set the terrain heights of the data. Okay, so all this has to happen before here, otherwise it doesn't get applied. Now, I've added the rough terrain in here after the purlin, so it's only going to rough up the purlin. You can add this wherever you like. You could add it as many times as you like, depending on the effect that you want. Having said that, you could put these functions in any order that you like, based on what you want. Possibly instead of the apply purlin, because it's going to apply that over the top of the whole map, whereas all of these can happen in any order. And then the smoothing I've got right at the end after we've done everything. And I've got it in a loop for a smooth amount. So this smooth amount, if it's 5, it will run the smooth function 5 times. Actually don't need that in there. It's left over from old code. Okay, so that's smooth terrain. Now if we go back up to these functions here, okay, so that's fine. And then right at the top, the values that are going into are here. So we've got this, it should be rough, can't spell, rough settings, which allow you to set the rough amount that you want. And then also the smooth settings. Again, that shouldn't be there either. I think that might affect this one here, but I've got it out of order. That's interesting because I think it still works. I didn't realize you'd have them in different orders. So anyway, this is smooth settings, and this is the smooth amount, which is how many times the smooth gets applied. So let's just save that. And if we go back to our terrain in Unity and click on terrain, we'll see we've got our rough amount here, and we've got our smooth setting. So let's just first of all rough the surface up a bit. Whoa, that's a lot. Okay, so now you can see that rough has been applied all over the top of the Pearl and Noise, which was quite drastic. We did get a nice river that time, though, from the generation. I might turn that down a bit. That's a bit better. The river's not as nice, though. But anyway, if we zoom in here, we can see we've got this sort of lumpy surface. You might want to dial that down, but you also might want to smooth it. So let's do some smoothing. We'll add 2 lots of smoothing and generate that. And now you can see it has smoothed the surface. If we get down nice and close, it's rocky, but it's not as sharp as it was before. Now the same thing happens if we add a mountain. So those mountains, let's add 1 mountain, and let's make it fairly high and steep, and turn smoothing off and just generate that mountain. So there it is there. Let me lift that up and make it a bit higher. Okay, and you can see it's got quite a nasty peak on the top of it, but if we smooth it down a few times, oh, it really did smooth it down, didn't it? Okay, so you can see what it's done to that mountain. It's really smoothed the top of it and made it just a whole lot nicer than it was before. And it's actually quite fortunate, isn't it, that our river ended up going around that mountain. Totally by chance, not by design. Okay, so that is the end of this series of terrain procedural generation. Now, this is not like the only way of doing this, and these are just some of the techniques. So you can, as I said before, you can mix them in different orders, you can try and change the values around, but basically what it is it's grabbing all the vertices in the wireframe here and lifting them up or pushing them down and moving them around. And by using some methods like the Brownian motion and other simulated models, if you want to look up some scientific papers online, you can find a heap of simulations of erosion and mountain building and plate tectonics and all those sorts of things to help inform how you're going to modify your terrain. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this little series and you've learnt a few techniques for actually modifying the terrain mesh that comes in Unity, and also for texturing it automatically. I really enjoyed putting it together, and I love playing around with this stuff. So, feel free to now add a first-person controller onto your map and go for a little walk and explore. So thanks for watching this, and I will talk to you in my next tutorial.